Hi, I'm Pat Sheveland. It's so nice to be here. I consider myself a grief coach, and what I really do is I focus on helping families in healing their grief, not only during the times that they have the death of a loved one, but also that pre-grieving time, that time when we're working through family stuff and finding the healing so that when our loved one dies, that we really have a beautiful, fulfilling relationship with them. And there are no regrets in life. So that's what I do. So how common is family estrangement? That's a really good question. And I actually went out and did a little bit of research. And I found that there was an article in Psychology Today, and this was back in like 2014, but it listed at that time 7% of adult children were estranged from their mother, and 27% were estranged from their father. And I believe that there's a multitude of reasons for that. You know, maybe there was divorce in the family. Sometimes there can be estrangement between siblings. There could be issues of chemical dependency and some real challenges in the family that way that causes estrangement. And the other thing that was interesting is in that same study, that article that I read, in Germany, it had 40% of the people reported that they had some kind of intergenerational conflict. So how common is it? I would say that most of us have, if we don't have it in our own family, have actually someone that we know that has reported that they have some kind of conflict that has caused some type of estrangement. You know, when an estranged family member dies, I'm actually a certified celebrant. And so that has happened where I've met with a family and maybe some of the children were estranged from the parent, or the siblings might be estranged from each other. And so what do you say? You know, it's uncomfortable, right? But what I do is I like to get a little history. So I just ask how they're doing. I gently ask, how is it going? And then I follow their lead, because some people might be super angry. And so I don't want to foster that anger, but I want to acknowledge it and honor people for where they're sitting at. Some people might have deep sadness because this was something that they weren't able to heal, the estrangement, before their loved one died. So that's where just being very loving and helping them to know that love supersedes everything. And even though in this human world that we're in, things happen, we're human, we can have issues with one another. And it really is approaching them with love and sincerely offering your condolences, whether they had a strong relationship with their loved one or not at the time that they died. Okay. Some of the signs of that you might be experiencing estrangement, I mean, they can be really varied, right? You may not have talked to your loved one, or someone in your family has not talked to each other for years and decades. I actually had something like that in a family member, not my immediate family member, but where the son-in-law had said something to his mother-in-law, and she took it so seriously. And he was joking, but she took it so seriously and had kind of been riding him hard throughout his whole marriage to her daughter. And so he just said, I'm done having any relationships. So they literally did not speak for the remainder of their lives, which was very difficult for the daughter slash wife, who was caught in the middle between her families. So that's like really serious. But I know families too that they kind of go in and out of estrangement. They have conflict, and then they may not talk to each other for months or a year, and then they somehow get back together, and it's almost like a pattern in their behavior. But I think that there's usually, you're going to find some anger, maybe feeling abandoned. You know, if you're estranged from a parent, maybe you feel abandoned emotionally, or maybe it was a physical abandonment. And so I think knowing that, if you take a look at yourself and say, is this really estrangement or not? If you find yourself that you don't want to be interacting with that person or those persons, there is probably some bit of estrangement there. You know, I've gone through that in my own family, and it wasn't that we literally said we're cutting each other off, but we just didn't interact with each other as much. And I could feel in myself like, oh, I'm just really uncomfortable being in their company right now. And so I had to work through some healing with that piece. So some people wonder, well, how long does estrangement last? And I spoke a little bit about that, but it could go on for years. It could go on forever. But it really depends on the length that those kind of negative emotions are going on within you. If both parties are willing to work on resolving the issues, and willing to talk about it, it can be very short-lived. You know, you might have a very short-lived estrangement, like, okay, I got really mad at my mother, we didn't talk for a few weeks. But reaching out and having a conversation and start tentatively talking some more, that's a very quick release of estrangement. But again, like the story that I told earlier, it could go on for the remainder of one's life if the parties are not willing to have a conversation about it and work with it. So because I work with people who are in the grieving process because their loved one has transitioned, has died, I'm also stepping into working with people where, how do we heal issues of estrangement, negative emotions, those kind of things before our loved one passes. And I'm going to use my own story. My mom just passed away 4 weeks ago. I wasn't estranged from my mom. She actually lived with us for 7 years. But there were some things that happened in our family with my brothers, that there were some misunderstandings. And so we weren't completely estranged, but we weren't connecting and talking to each other very much. We kind of were like ships sailing past each other in the middle of the night. They would come visit my mom in our home. I would kind of go somewhere else into a different space, just because there was a little bit of uncomfortableness about some perceptions that both parties had. And then my mom started getting weaker. She started getting sicker. And I knew that I just really needed to release that. And so I actually approached my brothers in a very kind and gentle way, saying, she's our last connection. We have to really work really hard at staying connected with one another. It's so important for us. And they all agreed that we need to be the ones making the effort. And I'll tell you that when my mom passed, all of us were there. We were actually to get a family portrait together with all of us there on her final day. Everybody was smiling, and there were no regrets. And so we were able to move forward in our grief journey about our mother, and we're doing it together as a family. So that's the advice I would get, is if you are in an estranged relationship, see if you can work through it now, and take tiny steps to move forward with that before your loved one dies. Because once they die, I mean, we can still heal wounds even after our loved ones pass, but it's just so much more, what's the word that I want to use? Comforting. And I don't know, you can relax into your grief a little bit better, if that makes sense, because you are now surrounded in full unconditional love, and that you've healed that with with your loved one. I just real quick, I have another story where a woman reached out to me, and her father was, all the children they had, I think they had like 8, 9 children, were all estranged from dad because dad had left their mom. He got remarried. The new wife kind of kept him from his family, and he died. And only one of the children actually had kind of reconnected with him, and it was very important for her to do that. And so actually what I worked with her on is how might she be able to bring the rest of her siblings together even after his passing, to help release those emotions and maybe reframe the relationship and understand where their father might have been coming from, and to really speak to where they were coming from so that they could start a healing process. Because if we don't do it, that stays with us, and then it can be put on generation after generation after generation because we're holding that energy. Okay, so how do you address the grief? There are many ways, but this is what I highly recommend, is find a person, whether it's a professional or it might even be a very good friend, that is an objective party, that you can have a conversation about what's going on with the estrangement in your family, and work through and do some reframing. So I'm going to use myself as an example again. When my mom moved in with my husband and I over 7 years ago, there were some perceptions that my brothers had. And it just came out sideways with me, and it felt really weird because our family had never had those kind of issues before. And so I actually sat down with a girlfriend whose mother had moved in with a sibling of hers, and their experience helped open up my eyes. So she said, you know, Pat, maybe your brothers are feeling a bit guilty because they can't have her there. So maybe that's coming out a little bit sideways for them, you know, that they're questioning why you're doing that. So there might be some guilt there. There might be a little jealousy because now your mom is going to be with you 24/7, and they still just get kind of visiting hours when they come in. There may be some uncomfortableness of how they can come and visit, you know, because she's no longer in her own home. And once my friends shared that with me, I was able to open up my eyes and my heart to my siblings and realize that it really had nothing to do with me, their feelings, but it really had to do with themselves. And I could hold it open with more love. And that was important, to have that energy. But I really think that if you're in an estranged relationship and it's a difficult one, go find a professional counselor, work with a coach who might be able to sort through those things so that you can come together and work through those feelings and release that estrangement, so it doesn't stay with you for the rest of your life.